Her face was obscured by the cowl, but her voice, when it finally spoke, was like smoke and velvet woven into sound. "Please," she said, "I have nowhere else to go." Elian didn't move. His finger twitched against the trigger guard, but she made no move toward him. Her hands, pale and smooth with a faint bioluminescence, were held forward in a show of peace. He could see the curve of her collarbone through the opening of the cloak, the faint pulse beneath skin that didn't quite look human, just close enough to be unsettling, close enough to be familiar. "I won't survive the night out here," she added, more quietly this time. It was the kind of voice that wrapped around you, the kind that could pull secrets from your lips before you realized they'd left you. Elian lowered the weapon slightly, torn between caution and curiosity. "What are you?" he asked. "I was a wife," she said. "Once." The answer came, too easily, too calmly, like she'd practiced it, or maybe repeated it to herself for so long that it had become her name. He didn't ask for more. Instead, he stepped back and gestured her in. That was the first mistake. The second was letting her stay. She didn't give a name. Or perhaps she did, and he just couldn't pronounce it. She offered a syllable that sounded like a sigh and the hiss of steam, but when he asked again, she only smiled, small and sad. "You can call me whatever you like," she said, drying her strange woven garment by the fire. That's what they all do. That set Elian on edge. Not just the content, but the way she said it. As if she'd been through this before. Many times. Too many. He called her Sael, a half-forgotten word from an old Terran dialect meaning regret. She accepted it without flinching. Sael was unlike anyone he'd ever met, and Elian had met his fair share of humans, Xenos, and the hybrids who blurred the lines in between. She moved with a grace that couldn't be learned. Her body was perfectly proportioned, but not in the usual engineered way synthetics were. This wasn't sterile design. This was alluring in a way that whispered of warmth and promises, of vulnerability and strength in equal measure, like her very presence was sculpted to catch the eye, to stir something low and primal in the spine. And yet, there was sadness clinging to her like perfume, a scent that lingered long after she left a room. Over the next few days, Sael made herself useful. She never asked questions, never pressed into his past, though she clearly could have. Elian wasn't subtle about the bottles he emptied or the nights he stared too long into the fire, but she said nothing. Instead, she cooked, cleaned, repaired a few broken systems he'd long since given up on. She moved like she'd lived here forever, like she belonged. Elian hated how easily he got used to her presence, but the tension never faded. It started small, the way her hand would brush his when she passed him a mug, the way she would stand just a little too close, her eyes flickering with something unreadable, the way she asked him, late one night, what human intimacy felt like. Not love, not sex, but intimacy, like she didn't know, or like she'd forgotten. "I had a husband," she said once. "He never touched me." The fire cracked loudly in the silence that followed. Elian stared at her, unsure what to say. "That sounds rough." Sael's eyes, pale as moonlight, locked on his. He wasn't allowed to. It wasn't his choice. It wasn't mine either. She didn't elaborate, but the implication hung in the air between them, like thick smoke. She had been owned, used, forgotten. That realization twisted something inside Elian, something old and jagged and long buried. He told himself it was empathy, anger, maybe, at whatever. Race or custom had treated her that way, but deep down he knew it was more than that. It was the way she looked at him, not with desperation, but possibility, as if, for the first time in who knew how long, she wasn't resigned to fate, as if she was choosing to stay. One night, as the rain pounded the roof again and lightning danced across the walls like ghostlight, she stood in the doorway to his room, not naked, but close. A sheer robe clung to her body like water. It didn't hide much. Her curves glistened faintly with the bioluminescent patterns of her skin. Tattoos, maybe, or natural designs, pulsing slightly with her breath. Her hair was damp, coiled like silver around her shoulders. Elian sat up in bed, heart kicking like a drum in his chest. Sael! I was bred to please, she said softly. Engineered, sculpted, trained. My body is designed for human compatibility, but I never had the chance. I was promised to someone who didn't want me, left behind after the treaty, forgotten. She stepped closer. I want to know what I was meant for. Elian swallowed hard. His throat was dry. The air felt thick, charged with something beyond static. I'm not the kind of man you think I am, he said. I don't think anything, she replied. I hope. Then she knelt beside the bed, her eyes level with his. Will you show me? Will you let me learn what it means to be desired? It wasn't just a proposition. It was a plea, but not for sex, for connection, for purpose, for meaning. And Elian, against every rational fibre in his body, reached out, just to touch her cheek. Her skin was warm, alive, real. She closed her eyes and leaned into his hand, exhaling like a weight had lifted from her soul. That was the moment he realized. She didn't want to be owned anymore. She wanted to belong. Rylan couldn't remember the last time his heart had thudded like this. Heavy, irregular, uncertain. It wasn't just because of the shimmering alien woman standing in his doorway like a lost goddess, nor was it the sultry timbre of her voice that spoke to something primal within him. It was the story behind her presence, the weight of what she represented. The kind of mythos that you heard about in Drunk Space's stories. Fantastical tales about ancient pacts and forgotten brides. But this time, the legend had come to life. She was real. Flesh, blood, curves. And she had offered, herself without a trace of hesitation, like it was her duty, her calling, or worse, her last hope. That idea lodged itself into Rylan's gut, like an anchor dragging through sand. Why was she really here? How desperate did you have to be to proposition a stranger simply because he was the first man to stumble into an ancient ruin? She stepped inside without permission, her movements fluid, almost ceremonial, as if she'd done this before, or had been preparing for this moment her entire life. The doors slid shut behind her with a hiss, cutting off the cool breeze from outside and sealing the two of them together in his small habitation pod. Her eyes, those crystalline orbs that looked like entire galaxies had collapsed within them, flicked over his living space. A quick assessment, not of the room's worth, but of him. What kind of man lived here? What kind of man was he? I assumed you would live in something more dominant, she said finally, her head tilting with that alien grace that made her neck seem too delicate to hold the weight of her hair. But perhaps that's the test. To see who accepts me despite humble surroundings. He choked on a dry laugh. You think this is some kind of trial? Her face didn't change. Isn't it? Rylan took a step back, trying to buy himself space, clarity, anything. Look, I don't know what you think this is, but I'm not in the market for a wife, she finished, stepping closer again. A companion, a bonded mate who has waited countless cycles, locked in stasis, until the pact was invoked once more. Her proximity made the air warmer, thicker, like her presence disrupted the very molecules between them. The way she moved, it wasn't sexual in the human sense, but there was an intimacy to it. An awareness of the tension curling in the air, a manipulation of it, a slow, careful fan of the flames. You say you're a wife, he said, struggling to maintain his composure. But whose wife, exactly? Who did you marry? Her lips parted, and for the first time since she appeared, something shifted behind her confidence, a flicker of grief. A man like you, long ago, before the collapse. Before your kind forgot us. He made the pact, claimed me. We shared a bond deeper than language, deeper than species, but he was mortal, and I am not. It landed like a lead weight. She was talking about a human, a long-dead ancestor, perhaps, from an age before the stars had been charted, from the deep history buried beneath human arrogance. Rylan rubbed his temple, the ache starting to spread. And now, what? You just wait around for someone to find you and start over? I must offer myself. The pact demands it. I have waited. My body sustained by stasis. My mind, not so, fortunate. And now you are here. You spoke the phrase. You stood in the chamber. And I just read a plaque. Her eyes widened, hurt, flashing like a shard of glass. You invoked me. A long silence stretched between them. Her breathing was slow, deliberate, her chest rising and falling beneath the strange fabric that clung to her like silk made of starlight. Rylan tried not to notice the way her form was impossibly perfect, too symmetrical, too sculpted, as though crafted by something beyond human aesthetic, a living statue. But she wasn't cold. Her presence radiated warmth, heat even, and it was becoming harder to ignore. I don't even know your name, he muttered, more to himself than to her. Names are tricky, she said, with a slow nod, as though recalling a complex idea. Yours would struggle to shape mine, but when I bonded before, he called me Serenia. If that pleases you, it can be my name again. Serenia. There was a poetry to it, and it curled into his mind like smoke. Serenia, he repeated, slower this time. She smiled then, a small, content curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. And you are Rylan. I have tasted the shape of your name already. It fits you. Tasted? She stepped close again, and this time he didn't retreat. Her, hand lifted, palm open, and with a cautious grace she touched his chest. Not his skin, but the fabric of his shirt. Even through that barrier, the heat of her touch spread like a pulse. You breathe the same way he did, she whispered, gaze fixed where her hand rested. But your rhythm is different, quicker, unsettled. That's the difference of time, perhaps. Or fear. I'm not afraid, he said, though his voice trembled just slightly. She looked up, and for the first time, her expression was unreadable. You should be. The words wrapped around him like vines. Not threatening, but honest, direct. She wasn't trying to manipulate him. She was warning him, and that made it worse, because the danger wasn't physical. It was in what she represented, in what she could awaken. This whole thing, he said, finally stepping away and breaking the contact. It's insane. You can't just show up and throw yourself at me because of some ancient ritual. I'm not throwing myself at you, she said, her voice cooling now. I am offering. There is a difference. One implies desperation. The other is tradition, duty. I was created for this, forged to be bonded, and the bond must be renewed. Her words triggered something, some deep itch in his thoughts. Renewed? Why? She exhaled slowly, as if steeling herself. Because if it is not, I die. My purpose collapses. My body will not sustain itself without connection. I was built to belong. The silence after that was absolute. Her gaze didn't waver. There was no trickery in her tone, no lie in her posture. Rylan swallowed. That's not fair, he said quietly. It never was. His thoughts raced. This wasn't just about some ancient alien sex pact. It was about survival. Not just hers, but perhaps the survival of something greater. A legacy. A cultural ritual stretching into the void. He didn't know if he could carry that weight. Didn't know if any man could. But as her eyes lingered on his, full of need and gravity and loneliness, he realized something chilling. She wasn't just trying to seduce him. She was begging for a place in the world again. And the worst part? A dark, gnawing part of him wanted to give it to her. Rylan had always considered himself a man anchored in reality, a pilot, a trader, a wanderer of planets who preferred hard facts and practical results over speculation or superstition. He'd flown through debris clouds from ancient battles and once been stranded on a water world with carnivorous algae. He'd seen his share of strange, but none of it had prepared him for Serenia. She stood there, not moving, but she might as well have been drawing closer with every breath he took. That sensation, like she was everywhere in the room, her presence extending, beyond the limits of her own body, it gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. There was something magnetic about her, not just in the way her gaze tracked his every subtle movement, but in the gravitational pull she seemed to exert on the air itself. Every second she was near, his pulse jumped a fraction. Every time she spoke, he found himself leaning just slightly forward before he could stop himself. And the fact that she was honest, that made her even more dangerous. She didn't try to flatter him. She didn't pretend to understand his world. She didn't need to. She was the mystery. She was the temptation, not because she offered lust, but because she offered something deeper, more insidious, the illusion of purpose, of being chosen, of being part of something forgotten by history, but somehow timeless. And Rylan, despite every voice in his head screaming run, couldn't stop listening. "You say you'll die," he said, voice gravelly now, low from something building in his chest. "But that sounds like manipulation." "No," she answered gently, her tone mournful rather than defensive. "It's design. I am the last of the bonded. My kind. We don't reproduce the way yours do. There is no egg, no seed, no womb. We were made to link, to merge with our mate's energy, to become something shared. Without that, my system begins to degrade, my mind first, then the body, slowly, softly, as if the universe is reminding me that I no longer belong." She said it so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that the weight of it came in late, a punch to the ribs that caught him off guard. It wasn't melodrama. It was reality. And in some corner of his heart, Rylan believed her. Maybe it was in her eyes, which shimmered with something ancient and weary, or the slight tremble in her fingers, which she tried to still by folding her hands together tightly. "And if I say no," he asked, needing to hear it, "then I leave," she said simply. "I find another, or I don't, and the ending is mine to bear." The coldness of her resolve was somehow worse than desperation. He would have preferred begging. He could have ignored that. But this quiet acceptance, it crawled beneath his skin and made his stomach twist. "Why me?" "Because you were there. Because you opened the door. Because your voice echoed in the chamber, and I heard it like thunder in my veins. Because fate, or chaos, or some long-dead architect chose you." He stared at her, and she stared back. No fear, no aggression, just patience. That was the worst part. She wasn't trying to coerce him. She was waiting for him to decide if he would carry her burden, share her tether, if he would accept her. But could he? "You don't know what I've done," he said, more to himself than her. "I'm not clean. I've smuggled weapons. I've abandoned people. I've stolen fuel from evac ships and sold it to pirates. I've killed. You don't want me." "I do," she said softly, "because all of those things mean you lived, and I have only been dreaming." The room felt smaller now. Her presence was overwhelming but not oppressive, like heat on the edge of a fever. Like the stillness before a storm, he could feel the throb of his pulse behind his ears and knew his body was betraying him, leaning into the moment, even as his mind screamed at him to pull away. "What if I say yes?" he whispered. Serenia didn't move, didn't smile, but her eyes softened, and in them was something that wasn't just desire. It was gratitude, as if the offer had already been enough, regardless of whether he accepted. "Then I become yours," she said. The weight of the words was unbearable, not because they were sensual, but because she meant them. No game, no power play, just raw, soul-bearing, submission to a purpose she couldn't escape. A desire to belong to something again after centuries of silence. Rylan stepped backward instinctively, needing air, but the room was too small for escape, and truthfully, there was nowhere to run. Because the tension wasn't just in the air, it was in him, the part of him that was lonely, the part that wanted to matter, that wanted to be needed, and here she was, a creature out of time, out of myth, telling him that he was not just wanted, but essential. Her footsteps were soundless as she approached, slow and deliberate. Rylan didn't move. Couldn't. Her fingers lifted again and this time touched the skin above his collarbone, just under the edge of his shirt. The touch was feather-light, barely there, but it burned like a brand. Your species, she murmured, breeds through need, through heat, through instinct, but also through longing. I've watched your memories from the ruins, your rituals. You do not simply take, you choose, you love. He shivered at the intimacy of her words, the way she spoke about human biology like it was both sacred and foreign. I want to understand, she continued, her fingers drifting down just slightly, tracing the edge of his collar. I want to feel what it means to need. Her breath brushed against his throat. His mouth went dry. She wasn't pushing. She was asking, pleading without begging. It was different, so much worse. It was working. I'm not some romantic hero, he whispered. You don't need to be, she replied. You only need to see me. He did. God's help him, he did. Not just the flawless beauty, not the curves or the shimmering skin, but the way she carried that endless sadness behind her calm, the way she trembled when she touched him, the way she waited without demanding. He could take her right now. She wouldn't stop him. She had made that clear, but the tension wasn't in the act. It was in the choice. She had offered everything, body, bond, soul. And now the universe waited for his answer, holding its breath. He looked down at her hand, still on his chest. He took it gently in his own, not rejecting, but not yet accepting either. Her eyes locked onto his. I need time, he said. Her nod was barely perceptible, but it was there, respecting his space, trusting him. You have until my body fails, she whispered. That felt like a blade pressed softly to his ribs. He didn't know how long that was. Hours, days, but the countdown had begun, and every second that passed, she drew closer. Not because she moved, but because he did. Time had a different texture after that moment. Rylan felt it pass less like a linear stream and more like water sloshing in a half-submerged chamber. Uneven, unpredictable, swaying between stillness and pressure. He found himself drifting through the hours after Serenya's quiet declaration, like a man moving through fog, his body going through the motions, running ship diagnostics, checking cargo logs, preparing the navcom, but his mind always circling back to her, to the quiet rhythm of her voice, to the unsettling gentleness of her touch, to the unbearable way she had looked at him when she said, "Then I become yours." It was insanity, he told himself. She was alien. More than alien, she was ancient. She had been created, or born, or summoned. He still wasn't sure, by a civilization that no longer existed. He knew nothing about her physiology beyond the surface. Nothing about what she might become if he accepted her offer. There could be some kind of parasitic link, a biological override, a trap wrapped in soft skin and patient eyes. But that didn't stop the ache that had lodged itself in the hollow of his chest. Didn't stop the whisper that grew louder in his skull every time she passed him in the ship's narrow corridors. She never reached out, never begged, never pressured, and somehow, that restraint was infinitely more seductive than any attempt at seduction could have been. He had offered her time, and she honored that promise with a kind of reverence that made his teeth grit. It would have been easier if she had been forward, if she had thrown herself at him with desperate need. But no. Serenia existed like a question mark on his soul, a silence that hummed with potential energy, the kind of silence before a storm or an explosion. One morning, though aboard a ship, morning was always just whatever cycle the internal lights mimicked, he found her in the engine room. She was standing perfectly still, gazing into the exposed paneling of the pulse core, her hair a cascade of iridescent silver that caught the light like strands of mercury. He meant to pass by, meant to leave her to her thoughts, but then she spoke. "It hums like a heartbeat," she said, barely above a whisper. Rylan paused mid-step. "It comforts you, doesn't it?" she asked, turning her head slightly, though not fully facing him. "The sound of something alive, even when you know it's not." He didn't answer at first. He was too taken by the image, her profile against the glowing panel, soft features illuminated by the shifting pulse of the core, eyes reflecting 1,000 shades of blue. "It's familiar," he finally said. "A constant. One of the few. On this ship." She turned to him slowly, folding her hands in front of her, tilting her head with the grace of someone who had studied human mannerisms, but still didn't fully inhabit them. "Would you like me to be a constant?" she asked, voice softer than anything he'd heard in weeks. "Would you like me to hum against you, like a pulse in the dark?" His breath caught, not from the question itself, but from the way she meant it. There was no flirtation there, no pretense. She was offering herself not as a plaything, but as an anchor, a heartbeat. "Why?" he asked before he could stop himself. "Why are you still here?" She stepped forward, and though the movement was slow, it felt like a seismic shift. The distance between them shrank not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. She stopped just within reach, close enough that the air between them shimmered with the tension of something unsaid. "Because I was made to belong," she said. "And your presence is the first thing that's made me feel less alone since I woke." Rylan exhaled slowly, deeply. He had nothing to say to that. What could he say? "I can wait," she continued. "I will wait. Until your fear becomes something else." He didn't know how to deal with that. He didn't know how to deal with her. That night, if night it could be called, he tried to sleep. But the image of her wouldn't leave him. He found himself remembering details he didn't consciously commit. The way her eyes shimmered differently, depending on the lighting. The almost imperceptible shift in her body language when he entered a room. The way she always left a space between them, always gave him room to breathe, never pushing. But that space was shrinking, not because she moved closer, but because he did. He found himself walking to her quarters without thinking, his feet drawn by something deeper than curiosity, something primal. He paused outside the sealed door, hesitating. The ship was quiet around him, too quiet. It made his breath sound louder, made his heartbeat thunder in his ears. Before he could knock, the door hissed open. She stood there in the doorway, wrapped in a gauzy robe that shimmered like oil on water. It clung to her form, but modestly, more like ceremonial garb than lingerie. Her hair was unbound, cascading like liquid moonlight over her shoulders. Her expression didn't change. "I heard you coming," she said simply. Rylan stepped inside, without speaking. The door closed behind him. Her quarters were dimly lit by the soft ambient glow of the wall panels, casting long shadows. It smelled faintly of something sweet and alien, like crushed blossoms and ozone. She stepped aside, letting him take in the space. There was no bed, not in the traditional sense, just a wide, padded platform covered in woven sheets and intricate designs he couldn't recognize. He turned to her slowly. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. Serenia approached him with the same gentle pace as always, until they were a breath apart. She didn't touch him yet, but he could feel her. "You don't have to," she whispered. "You just have to feel." And God's help him, he did. The air between them buzzed. There was no contact, no kiss, no sudden lunge, just a gravity that pulled him toward her until his hand lifted almost involuntarily and hovered near her cheek. She didn't flinch, didn't lean in, just waited. He brushed her skin with his fingertips. It was warm, real, alive. Her eyes fluttered closed as if the sensation was electric. "I haven't been touched in lifetimes," she murmured, voice trembling. "Not like this, not with care." His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. His other hand moved to her hip, tentative, testing. Her breath caught audibly in her throat, and it broke something in him. "I can't promise you forever," he said. "I don't want forever," she replied. "I want this, now, the chance to be wanted." Their lips met with aching slowness. It wasn't hunger, not yet. It was reverence. Her kiss was soft but not weak. Curious, exploring, like a woman learning language through skin. Her hands found his shoulders, fingers splayed, not gripping but grounding. His arms slid around her waist and pulled her close, and her whole body seemed to shiver at the contact. But it was the sound she made, somewhere between a gasp and a moan, filled with disbelief and relief, that nearly undid him. This wasn't just about release. This was about recognition, about reminding each other they were real. As he guided her gently toward the platform behind her, she broke the kiss just long enough to whisper, "Are you sure?" "No," he said honestly. "But I'm done waiting," and in her answering smile, in the way she lowered herself onto the waiting sheets and extended a hand toward him, not with urgency, but with hope, he saw something that made every fear fall away. Trust. It shimmered in her eyes like starlight, and when he took her hand, when he joined her on that strange, soft surface, woven with symbols of a long-dead people, it was not the beginning of lust. It was the beginning of belonging. Rylan had never touched someone like this before, not with reverence, not with this quiet quake inside him, threatening to unravel every last barrier he thought he'd built. Serena didn't move fast. She didn't claw at him with desperation. She simply lay back on that strange, silken bedding with her hands still extended, her breath slow, her eyes patient but bright with something alive. It was as if she could feel time bending around them, slowing, thickening, tightening like a thread wrapped around both of their throats. Her presence filled the room, not loudly, not forcefully, but completely. She made the space feel smaller without moving at all. When he took her hand, her fingers curled around his, as if she were memorizing the shape of his bones. And when he knelt beside her, hovering, uncertain, her gaze softened, not out of pity, but something far deeper. Understanding. As if she saw the storm in him and chose not to tame it, but to welcome it. She guided his hand to the center of her chest, not to seduce, but to show him something. Beneath his palm, her skin was warm, nearly hot, and a faint pulse vibrated against his touch. Not just a heartbeat, but something slower, deeper. A resonance, like music trapped beneath the surface. The rhythm wasn't human. It wasn't anything he recognized, but it responded to him. With every inch he leaned closer, every breath he shared with her, the pulse deepened, strengthened, as if she were coming alive through him. "I am not fragile," she said softly, voice threaded with trembling steel. "But I am unfinished." He didn't fully understand, not yet, but part of him knew exactly what she meant. His other hand moved to cradle her jaw, brushing back a strand of luminous hair. Her skin responded to the contact, barely perceptibly, but enough. As if her cells remembered touch, remembered closeness, remembered something lost. Her lashes fluttered when his thumb moved across her cheekbone. That soft, slow blink that said more than words. "You're here. I'm real. Don't stop." He leaned in, his lips ghosting just above hers, not yet touching. Their breaths mingled, in the space between them, warm, humid, electric. Her fingers tightened on his just slightly, not dragging, not pulling, just reminding him she was there, beneath him, with him. And then he kissed her. Not like a man claiming, not like someone taking, but like someone answering. Her lips opened beneath his, not with hunger, but with relief, and the low sound she made. Gods, that sound, echoed in the hollow places of him. It wasn't a moan. It wasn't lust. It was longing. Centuries of it. Layers of silence peeled back with every slow stroke of his mouth on hers. She kissed like someone who'd spent lifetimes, alone and didn't dare believe she'd ever be held again. His hands mapped her body cautiously at first, but she arched into him, not to seduce, but to reassure, to show him she wanted this, needed this, that she chose this, not out of desperation, but out of clarity. You feel like fire, he whispered, against her lips. So do you, she replied, breath trembling. But yours burns at the center, quiet, deep. I've never seen a man hold so much and give so little. That hit him somewhere raw, because it was true. He'd spent years surviving, years burying, forgetting, pretending. He'd learned to carry loneliness like armor, learned to speak without revealing, touch without feeling, move without staying. But she saw through that. She saw him. And as her hands slid under his shirt, fingertips trailing heat against his skin, he realized something terrifying. He wanted to be seen. Her hands were reverent, mapping, not desperate. She explored him the way a blind woman might memorize a sculpture, learning his lines, his curves, the warmth beneath the surface. Her touch ignited 1,000 nerves he didn't know he had, and when he shivered, she didn't laugh, didn't smirk. She simply smiled like she was proud, as if his vulnerability meant something. "Are you afraid?" she asked, voice barely audible. He nodded. Her hand cupped the side of his neck, thumb brushing the edge of his jaw. "Good," she said. "So am I." They undressed slowly, not like lovers racing to the finish, but like pilgrims peeling back, sacred layers. Every inch of skin revealed felt like a confession. Every breath grew heavier. The light in the room dimmed naturally, almost intuitively, until only the glow of the pulse core behind her quarters lit their skin. And when she was finally bare before him, he didn't gawk. He didn't stare. He simply looked and breathed. Her body was not like a human woman's. It shimmered in places, glowed faintly along her spine and ribs. There were small, almost imperceptible differences in the way her limbs curved, the softness of her skin, the shape of her hips. But none of it felt alien. It felt sacred. He reached for her like a man reaching for something holy, and when their bodies finally met, chest to chest, skin to skin, he felt the pulse inside her respond like a second heart. She moaned, not from pleasure, not yet, but from connection. And as she wrapped her legs around his waist and pressed, her forehead to his, she whispered in his native tongue, voice shaking with something ancient. "You make me real." And gods help him. She made him real too. But even now, even with their bodies aligned, with her warmth wrapped around him and her hands clutching at his back, it was not release that came next. It was the waiting, the breathless moment before, the held inhale, the tightening coil of energy that refused to snap. Rylan pressed himself against her, forehead still locked with hers, heart hammering in his chest. Their breaths came in sync now, fast but steady, rising and falling together. He felt the trembling of her thighs against his hips, the tension in her fingers, the way her eyes fluttered open and locked with his. There was so much unspoken between them, so many questions, so much unknown, but none of it mattered now, because she was his, and he, gods help him, he was becoming hers. He moved inside her slowly, carefully, like a man crossing a threshold he could never return from. And her gasp, sharp, high, broken, tore straight through him. Her nails dug into his back, her legs locked tighter, and her mouth opened in a silent cry that spoke of centuries. She was not fragile, but she was starved, and he fed her, not with force, but with presence, with patience, with everything he had left. They moved together like tides, like storm fronts crashing in slow motion. The pulse inside her thrummed louder now, vibrating against his chest, singing in the marrow of his bones. And as she whispered his name, over and over, like a prayer etched into the dark, he felt something open in him he didn't know existed. A wound, a light, and still they didn't rush. They lingered in that slow burn, that unbearable almost, that edge where tension lived, sharp and sacred. Her hips moved with his in perfect time. Her breath caught with each deep thrust, and her voice, a broken, beautiful mix of old tongue and human need, wrapped around him like silk. This wasn't sex. This wasn't release. This was reclamation, and it was only beginning. Rylan lay still for a long moment after, his chest pressed against hers, their breaths tangled and shallow, the silence stretching long and wide around them like a glass shell, just waiting to crack. The glow from the core embedded in the wall behind Serenya's bed painted them in undulating waves of warm gold and cool indigo, shadows sliding across their bodies like slow, sentient things. But it wasn't just the light that had changed. It was the air itself. He could feel her now, not just in his arms, not just in the slick heat still pulsing between their bodies, but everywhere, in his thoughts, at the edge of his awareness, humming beneath his skin like a new layer of nerve endings had been woven into him without his permission. And she looked at him like she knew, like she could sense it too. Her eyes didn't glow, but they seemed brighter now, crystalline with some emotion she hadn't dared show before. She reached up slowly, fingers trembling as she brushed the back of his neck, and he felt the echo of her touch inside him, not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. It was as if something had been passed between them, transferred, imprinted. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry, his voice caught somewhere between awe and fear. She gave him a faint, understanding smile and brought her forehead to his again, just like before. This time, he didn't flinch. "There is a bond," she whispered, her breath soft against his lips. "A sacred one, older than names, older than planets. It wasn't supposed to activate. Not like this." He stared at her, muscles tensing despite the softness of their embrace. "What bond?" "The kind that can't be broken," she murmured. "Not by distance, not by time, not even by death." And there it was, that drop in his stomach. That subtle shift from desire to dread, from heat to something colder and far more permanent. He tried to move, tried to sit up, but her arms slid around his shoulders with surprising strength, not holding him down, but holding him close. "I didn't know," she said, and there was real regret in her voice now. "I thought the ritual had been severed long ago. That part of me, what I was before, it should have died in the stasis, but it didn't. You touched it. You woke it up." Rylan sat up slowly, dragging himself off her body. His hands braced against the bedding as he looked down at her. She didn't cover herself. She didn't flinch under his gaze. She watched, him like she expected him to run, like she'd seen it before. "Tell me what this means," he said, voice hoarse. "Don't give me riddles." Serenya sat up too, folding her legs beneath her, arms draped loosely across her lap. Her skin shimmered, faintly in the low light, the glow along her ribs pulsing like it was sinking to his breath. She was silent for a moment. Then, "In my people's tradition, when two beings join in true intimacy, not just of the body, but of the core, a tether forms. It is not emotional. It is not spiritual. It is biological. Our bodies align. Our thoughts echo. And over time, if left unbroken, the bond deepens. It changes us. We become... Her throat worked as she searched for a word. Reflections, mirrors, halves of the same thread. It is beautiful and terrifying. Rylan stood, pacing now, dragging both hands through his hair. So what? You're saying I'm stuck with you now? Her expression didn't change, but her voice cooled just slightly. No, I'm saying you're becoming me, and I'm becoming you. He stopped, frozen. I don't know what that means for a human, she continued quietly. I've never bonded with one. No one has. Our histories, our rituals, they were all meant for my kind. But you are strong. You are resonant. More than any man I've ever met. You didn't just wake me, Rylan. You bound me. He shook his head. I didn't mean to... I know, she said. Neither did I. The silence that followed was thick with things neither of them had words for. The tension between them didn't dissolve with the sex. It sharpened, hardened into something more volatile, more electric. They had crossed a threshold, but the terrain beyond it was unfamiliar and steep. And still, his eyes couldn't stop drifting to her bare shoulders, the arch of her neck, the pulse in her collarbone that matched his own heartbeat. She was still beautiful, devastatingly so, but it was no longer the kind of beauty you admire from a distance. It was the kind that claims you, the kind that digs in and makes itself a part of you. He sat again, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. So what happens now? Serenia looked at him with something softer than sympathy, almost reverence. Now, we learn. Together. That night, sleep did not come easily. Not for him, not for her. She lay beside him, silent, watching him as if she feared he would disappear the moment she closed her eyes. And Rylan, for all his confusion, for all his anger at being swept into something he hadn't chosen, couldn't bring himself to leave the bed. Her presence was like gravity. He didn't want to orbit. He wanted to collide. But the next morning brought more than just awkward silence. It brought changes. He felt it first when he stepped out of the sleeping chamber. His body was fine, no pain, no lingering soreness. But there was a hum, a low, nearly inaudible vibration in the soles of his feet, like the ship itself had tuned its systems to respond to him. Doors opened slightly faster. Lights adjusted more intuitively. The air even smelled different, like something floral and mineral mixed. Serenia followed him, wrapped in a loose robe that did nothing to hide her silhouette. It's beginning, she said softly, watching him as if cataloguing every move. The bond. It's waking parts of the ship too. It's linked to me, which means it's linked to you now. He turned sharply. You didn't think to mention that before? She tilted her head, unbothered. I didn't think we'd ever make it this far. And that hit him again. That slow, dawning realization that none of this was by accident. That fate, or instinct, or something far older had driven them here. That what they shared wasn't just physical, it was foundational. And that if he walked away now, he might lose something far greater than freedom. He might lose himself. Later, as they stood in the observation deck, watching stars drift past the glass dome, Serenia came to stand beside him. Not touching, just near. Her presence was no longer just beside him. It was inside him, threading through every beat of his heart. You said you were forgotten, he said quietly. I was, she answered, buried, erased. And now, she turned her head, slowly, eyes gleaming like twin moons. Now I'm remembered, and God's help him, he didn't want to forget her either. The days that followed were anything but ordinary, and Rylan could feel the shift in everything, down to the most minute interactions. Time itself seemed to bend slightly around them. No, longer ticking in a straightforward rhythm, but rather folding in strange and intimate loops. The ship responded more sensitively to his presence, as if it had grown a second consciousness, his own. Doors hissed open, not just when he approached, but when he thought about moving. Lighting adjusted to his mood. Temperature fluctuated subtly, always finding the exact point of comfort without him needing to say a word. At first, it felt like a trick of the mind, but then came the dreams. They weren't his own. He would wake in the dark, chest heaving, body drenched in sweat, heart thrumming with emotions that weren't entirely his. Visions of stars collapsing into themselves, of planets with violet skies and oceans that breathed, of ancient chants sung under bioluminescent moons, and most vividly, Serenia. Always Serenia. Not as he knew her, but as she had once been. Regal, cloaked in ceremonial threads of gold and bone, leading processions of her people through immense crystalline caverns that pulsed with energy, and in those dreams, she was never alone. He was always there in some form, as a shadow, as a reflection, as a presence beside her, indistinct yet impossibly right. The bond was deepening, and it terrified him. He kept his distance during the waking hours, no longer sure if she could sense every thought brushing against his skull. The walls between them were dissolving, not emotionally, but biologically, and he wasn't ready to lose himself, not yet, not even for her. But Serenia, for all her otherworldly calm, had grown restless. She would pace sometimes, barefoot across the observation deck, her eyes flickering with some internal conflict, lips parted as if she were on the verge of confessing something terrible. She didn't press him, didn't force closeness, but it hung there between them like the scent of ozone before a storm, inevitable, electric. One evening, Rylan found her standing in the center of the ship's atrium, the heart of the vessel, where glowing roots from the ship's core snaked up through the transparent floor, casting luminous tendrils of light across her skin. She stood there like a statue carved from the dreams he couldn't forget, her hands slightly raised, palms open, like she was drawing power from the very marrow of the ship itself. He froze at the threshold, watching her. She turned slowly, eyes locking onto his, and the way her expression shifted, it nearly undid him. It wasn't desire. It wasn't sadness. It was yearning, pure and ancient, as if she'd waited through lifetimes for him to find her again. "You're changing," she said softly, as if it pained her to speak the words aloud. Rylan crossed his arms over his chest, a defensive gesture he barely recognized in himself. "I know," she stepped forward, bare feet silent against the glass. "You're resisting, but it's already happening." "Tell me what's going to happen," he demanded, his voice sharper than he meant it to be. "What am I becoming?" She stopped a breath away, looking up at him like she was trying to memorize his face. "You're becoming part of the forgotten." A chill laced its way down his spine. "That's not an answer." Serenia took a shaky breath, and her shoulders, always so proud, so poised, slumped ever so slightly. "My people were not like yours. We did not breed for power. We bred for resonance, compatibility. Our biology seeks harmony, and when it finds it, it anchors, it spreads. The bond isn't just between us, it's a seed. If left to grow, it will begin transforming you." "How?" Rylan's voice was barely above a whisper now. "Your senses, your reflexes, your memory, your chemistry. You'll begin to process light differently, hear beyond the range of human sound. Your brain will reorganize itself to interpret my language, my instincts, my needs. And in time, you will crave what I crave, feel what I feel. Our pulses will align, our pain will echo." He stared at her in stunned silence, his heartbeat thudding hard against his ribs. "You should hate me for it," she said, stepping back. "You should, but you don't. And that terrifies you more than anything." It wasn't a question. He clenched his fists. "What happens if I fight it?" Her eyes darkened with a sorrow so profound, it stole the breath from his lungs. "Then it will hurt. It will tear pieces of you apart. It will take longer, but the end is the same. We have already crossed the threshold. And if I run? He asked, his voice a growl now, more to himself than to her. She tilted her head, not unkindly. Then I will die. Silence. Dead, suffocating silence. The words hung in the air like a verdict passed from the stars themselves. She didn't cry, didn't flinch. She just stood there, as if she'd accepted this long ago and was only now waiting for him to catch up to the truth. And the truth was this. He didn't want to run. That was the problem. That was the nightmare. The bond was not only making him feel what she felt, it was making him want to protect her, to stay near her, to belong to her. And the more he pulled away, the deeper that desire burrowed under his skin. He turned, walked out of the atrium, and didn't look back. But the ship, it had other plans. The corridors narrowed behind him, subtly, almost imperceptibly. The lighting darkened where he passed, like the walls themselves were mourning his distance. He rounded a corner and found himself not in his quarters, not in the guest wing, but back in the observatory. Again, as if the ship had redirected him. Serenia entered a moment later, quiet and barefoot again, her robe slipping from one shoulder. "You're trying to escape something you already are," she said gently, standing in the doorway. "The bond cannot be undone, only accepted, or suffered." Ryland's voice cracked. "Why me?" Her eyes searched his face. "Because you're the first man in centuries brave enough to see me." She walked toward him then, and he didn't move. "You could have taken any man," he whispered. "Why not someone else?" She stopped in front of him, placed her hand gently on his chest, right above his heart. "I did. Many. None could carry it. None could complete it. Their spirits broke. Their minds unraveled. But you anchored me the moment you touched me. You were my mate before you ever knew what I was." His breath hitched. "You think you're still human," she whispered. "But tell me, when was the last time you felt alone in your mind?" He couldn't answer, because he hadn't. Not since that night. She leaned up, mouth near his ear, her voice like silk soaked in fire. "Let me show you what it means to truly merge, not in fear, not in anger, but in surrender." And just like that, he was undone again.